Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Wickersham from the Mysterious Bookshop, and tonight I'm really thrilled to welcome you all to our event with D.C. Taylor, who some of you may know as David Taylor, for his new book, L.A. Burning. And I'm also thrilled that joining David in conversation tonight is Hank Phillippi Ryan, an incredibly accomplished novelist in her own right.
Thank you.
So again, if you are washing dishes, folding laundry, and we're waiting for us to get started, we are now. Please put your attention this way, and we'll be getting started quite shortly. So David Taylor is the author before L.A. Burning of the Night Trilogy, as I am dubbing it if his publisher didn't, Nightlife, Night Work, and Night Watch, great historical novels. He was born in New York City and spent a considerable amount of time working in Hollywood. I don't know if this is the credit that he's most proud of, but it's the one that's always stuck with me, that he is one of the writers of Hanky Panky, in which robotic car blows up what at the time was my parents' apartment in Boston. And my father drew the architectural plans for the movie so that they could replicate their lobby and blow it up. Which that always stuck with me because that was my own father's flirtation with Hollywood. Not to take any of the glory away from David, who actually had a quite esteemed career for working for film and television before turning to novels. And he's launching a new title with us tonight with L.A. Burning. And he'll be signing copies for us tomorrow. So if you place your order now, you will be getting a signed copy. And we're also thrilled that Hank is joining us. Hank Phillippi Ryan, you may know if you're from the Boston area particularly, as a television investigative reporter. She has also written, I'm afraid I don't have an exact number in front of me, but a number of novels, multiple series, and recently some terrific suspense standalones. She is the winner of the Agatha Anthony Daphne McCavity and the esteemed Mary Higgins Clark Award. And her latest novel, Her Perfect Lie, which she very savvily has a poster of in the back of her.
Casually, very casually.
Yes. Is her latest standalone psychological thriller about family, fame, and revenge. And it received star reviews from Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, which called it a superlative thriller. So it's really a thrill to have both of our authors here tonight. I'm going to take myself off screen and give this interview over to the pros. So please welcome David and Hank.
Thank you so much. And welcome to all of you here tonight. I want to begin by making it clear that Hanky Panky is not about me. That was not written about me, right? It was just the universe.
One of the great reviews we got with Hanky Panky was, Hanky Panky is a murky turkey.
I'm going to make a t-shirt with that on it.
Yeah.
It's much harder to make fun of L.A. Burning, which is absolutely a terrific book. If you read the back cover, it has some marvelous, marvelous blurbs on the back from terrific people. Heather Gudenkoff calls it nerve-shattering suspense not to be missed. And Joe Finder says, Cody Bonner is a true original. We're rooting from her for page 1, and she holds us in suspense to the very end. Congratulations on the launch of what I hope is just the first Cody Bonner. How has your launch been?
I don't really know. I mean, how do we know how the launch has been? People have not been, pounding on the door saying we must have the book. But I did hear from a bookstore in Maine that there were some excited people in, and I hope that's happening elsewhere.
And as long as that bookstore in Maine has the book and the excited people, that is the equation that you're looking for on launch day, even though it's a ridiculous pandemic launch.
Yeah.
Before we get into my questions, you can see my bookmarks here. Tell us just a little bit about this book.
Well, let's see. I mean, it's a contemporary story that takes place in Hollywood, set against the film business. It's about a young woman who went off the rails and ended up in prison at the age of 20 and has just gotten out. And it's a story, one hopes of redemption, though I'm not sure how redeemed she is. She did a lot of things when she was young that caused people pain, and she's aware of it now. And when she comes out of prison, one of the things that she's most concerned about is that she's an identical twin, and her twin sister washed up on the beach in Malibu about a year before she was released. Cody and her sister Julie were called mirror twins. They are absolutely identical. Their parents couldn't tell them apart sometimes, but a mirror twin, if one has a mole on the left shoulder, the other will have a mole on the right shoulder. And among the other things that they seem to mirror is Julie was a straight arrow who went through school well and went off to Stanford and became a lawyer. And Cody has always felt that she lived in the shadow of her sister, who seemed to be so alive and so with it about stuff, while she seemed to be floundering. So that may not prove to be true.
Well, that wonderful contrast in relationships, the contrast in people's lives, the haves and the have-nots, the why someone would leave a perfectly wonderful seeming life to do something else. Cody Bonner is, as you said, an identical twin, the daughter of a movie star, a former street kid, a bank robber at age 19, and a prison inmate at age 20. And the book begins with her coming out of prison, and more about that in a minute. But where did Cody Bonner come from in your brain? How did this wonderful main character emerge?
It's hard to know. I mean, I think looking back to when I started out trying to write short stories, every short story I wrote started with a sentence that popped into my head. Often the sentence didn't last through the story, but it would be an impetus to begin a story. And I'd been reading about twins. I'd been thinking about the 20 some years that we spent in Los Angeles, and things float up in a writer's mind that are things forgotten about, but now suddenly seem to have some traction. So I was thinking about that. And at the same time, all the circus about Harvey Weinstein was going on, and the sudden revelation that the casting couch was alive and well in Hollywood. And then I had a sentence that came to me one day, which was, no one oversleeps the day they come to release you from prison. So now I had to figure out who that was. And once you begin figuring out who that was, your story begins. At least for me, it does. And also, I wanted to write something from the point of view of a young woman, out of some sort of perverse curiosity, I guess, to see if I could. And we do have two. I've lived with women for the last 40 some years of my life. We have two daughters and my wife. So I thought, give it a try.
And I remember when I read this so early on, and I remember you feeling, or at least saying you were feeling a little bit apprehensive about writing from a woman's point of view. But I think about that. I mean, I've written from men's point of view as well. And it's really more about what the character wants and how far they'll go to get it and how they view the world. Do you put yourself into Cody's head and see the world through her eyes?
I do. The process of writing is very visual to me. And, we seem to be constrained these days about you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, because there's some broad understanding that it's gender appropriation or something. But I'm writing about one woman, and I allow myself that because she's a specific, unique character. And she has some attributes that many women don't have, and some others that many women do have. So what the hell?
And I can't wait for all of you readers to find out about those attributes. But it's so interesting that you kept that sentence. I have marked in here to read just the first paragraph of this book to you all. I want to read this to you because not only does it keep that first sentence, which is so magic, but it also shows what a wonderful voice David has in this novel. Here's just quickly the beginning. No one oversleeps the day they come to release you from prison. I was awake at 4:30. 5 years in cement teaches you how to wait. Time in prison is a routine of gray monotony, sometimes made bright by anger, violence, or fear. I watched the light change in the cell as the sun rose and tried to keep my mind blank. Don't think of what might go wrong, what order might be changed, what new charges they might decide to bring. At 7, the corrections officer we called Pinky opened my cell door. What the hell, Bonner? You ain't even packed. Can't stand to leave us, huh? I'm packed. I stood up. Nothing in the cell was coming with me. I was done with it. This part of my life was over. All I was taking with me was what I had learned. Now, anybody who knows a good story knows, oh boy, a good story is coming. What did it feel like to write that irresistible opening?
Well, you always wonder whether it's irresistible or whether you've just made a mistake. But, sometimes when you're writing, what you write just seems so correct, so right, that and of course, I went back over that paragraph, I don't know how many times. The sentence stayed pretty much the same. It got longer, it got shorter, it got longer, it got shorter. And the paragraph got longer and shorter, but eventually you get to what you think you're trying for and move on. It's exciting when you're writing and something seems to work to you, Faulkner said, kill your darlings, meaning don't hold on to something you think is brilliant unless it fits the story. But of course, that fits the story, so off we go.
Well, I vote that it is absolutely irresistible. And, the big story question, something is about to happen, and what is it? It's so portentous, even in that first tiny little opening bit. But the other thing about that opening first chapter, when Cody is released from prison, is, David, I've never been released from prison, so what would I know? But it sounds incredibly authentic. Like, how did you possibly get that honesty and authenticity about that scene?
Well, I have been in San Quentin, fortunately not under duress from law. Years ago, I was asked to adapt a novel by Dustin Hoffman, not the novel by Dustin Hoffman. He asked me to adapt it. It was a novel by a guy named Eddie Bunker, who wrote about 4 or 5 novels about being a criminal and being in jail. Eddie Bunker was what was called in California, a state-raised child. He went into the system when he was very young, and when he went to San Quentin, he was 17, the youngest person in San Quentin at that time. And doing the research for the movie that never got made, we spent 8 hours in a day in San Quentin.
Wait, you and Dustin Hoffman, that's the we you're talking about.
Me and Dustin Hoffman and a former inmate who was now a priest and a woman who was an assistant warden. And when you go into San Quentin as a visitor, they say to you in a monotone, Mr. Taylor, you understand, if you are taken, we will not trade you for a prisoner's freedom.
Oh,
and you say,
okay.
yes, and off you go. And the other guy, another guy, he stamped me as if I was coming into a nightclub with a black light stamp and said, don't wash your hands, no glow, no go.
Oh my, this is such a David Taylor story. So other people say, oh, I Googled it. I asked someone who might know. Only you could say, I went to San Quentin with Dustin Hoffman. That's just, there you have it right there.
He may have been back there with other people. I don't know.
Maybe so. And your writer brain is taking notes about this time. Talk a little bit about how that felt and the confinement and the release and the fear.
I would say that when we left, I felt like I took my first breath in 8 hours. San Quentin is one of the ugliest places you've ever seen. There's what's called the gun rail, which runs at about a 2-story or 3-story height through every building, every major building, and across the yards. And there are guys up there with guns. And they say, we don't fire warning shots anymore because if you fire a warning shot, the guy will then go stab the person he was going to stab because he has time. He knows he has time. So now we just shoot. Now, this was a number of years ago. I don't know whether they have changed their attitudes in San Quentin or not. It was a vicious, vicious place. and you could feel the tension in it at all times. The week before I was there with Hoffman, a prisoner who was under lockdown, he had a barred door, but he wasn't getting out for stuff. Somebody else threw an explosive gas bomb into the cell and burned him, not to death. But so somehow somebody created a bomb while he was in there and chucked it through on somebody else. There were some ugly people there, of course, the worst of the worst in the penal system in California, pretty much. We went down into the population, down into one of the exercise yards with this guy who had been in there, who's now a prison priest, and with the assistant warden, who was a woman. And suddenly everybody realized who was down there, and it wasn't me, it was Dustin Hoffman. And they all gathered around very close to us. I mean, they really sort of surrounded us. And the warden began to say things like, David, do something, the gun rail can't see us. And I what? I'm the writer. You're the warden. And it was pretty funny, though. There wasn't really a threat, though. Who knows what was going on. But the guys were starting to say, hey, Tootsie, you could spend time in my cell.
Oh my golly, this. I mean, the thing is, from the standpoint of your novel, most of it, by far, most of it does not take place in prison, but it does serve a couple of big reasons. And one is not only the contrast between the glittery Hollywood that is in most of your novel, but also the power of that fear and how certainly it would have changed 19-year-old Cody Bonner to be a different kind of person when she takes her first breath, when she comes out, exactly as you did. And Cody has a mission. When she takes her first breath out, she knows what she's going to do. Talk a little bit about what that is.
Well, twins have incredible closeness. I mean, sometimes psychic closeness. It's well documented that one will be hurt someplace and the other one will feel the pain. And so when her sister dies, she doesn't know she's died, but she collapses in the prison yard because she knows that something terrible has happened to Julie. And in some ways, she's been amputated from her sister, and her sister is like the phantom pain in your leg. So her drive is to find out what happened. She's not really talking about revenge, or it's just that for a while it was a big story. Her mother's name is Karen Bonner, and she's an Academy Award-winning actress. So for a while in Los Angeles, this big story, Karen Bonner's daughter, Julie, is found washed up naked on the beach in Malibu. But the press eventually moves on, and the cops said there will be an arrest. There was no arrest, and it all dies and goes away. So really only Karen Bonner and Cody are left with the real need to see something happen. And actually Karen, who is a rather pragmatic woman, doesn't actually want her daughter to be involved in that. She would prefer that everything just disappeared.
Well, the life of a movie star has to be very, very protected. I mean, the idea that this takes place in Los Angeles, and the descriptions and the feelings about Los Angeles are so gorgeous in this book. You have Cody say at one point something about Los Angeles, I could never figure out whether I loved it or hated it. And that, again, that contrast, that's so gorgeous in your book. Is that how you feel about Los Angeles as well?
That's how I felt when I was living there. I could never quite tell if I loved it or hated it. It's a very strange, the movie business is a very strange business. I mean, it's in some ways built on fear because, as William Goldman, a wonderful writer, said, nobody knows anything. What he means is nobody knows how to make a good movie. Everybody sets out to make a good movie. And as we are well aware, there are a great many that don't turn out to be good movies. So everybody's life is a little bit like they're in quicksand. They're not quite sure there's something solid under their feet. They're only as good as their last performance or their last movie or their last writing sample or whatever it is. So there's that. That it becomes wearing, I think, after a while.
Well, Cody and Julie and their mother grew up. Julie and Cody grew up in Los Angeles. And she says, we grew up in a special neighborhood of Los Angeles called the movie business or the industry, which is so well put. How do you know what it would be like to grow up in that sort of atmosphere and milieu, and with that contrast and that conflict and that struggle?
Well, I mean, once our children were in school, you began to see some interesting things. We had a friend who was quite high up in NBC TV movies for a while. He moved on to greater things, but he said that it's when he went to school with his daughters were the same age as our daughters, and even in grade school, he would watch, if he went for a family thing at the grade school, he would watch other people who were in the movie industry urge their children to go play with his children so that they could then come and talk to him about a project that they had for NBC. It would be so perfect. So once you see that kind of example of behavior going on, you begin to understand the pressure on everybody.
So you lived there. You and your family lived there, and
we were there. We lived there for 22 years.
And you worked in writing and in Hollywood. Talk a little bit about how you know so much of the inside scoop about that.
Well, I went. Priscilla and I moved to Hollywood in 1975, and I got lucky. I got an in to go in and talk to the people who ran the Rockford Files. I had gotten through another friend an unpublished novel that I had written to the guy who ran the Rockford Files. And so he read it and he thought, oh, maybe no skin off him. So he said, come in and bring in a couple of stories. And so I went and I found that I could get copies of old scripts. There was nothing, you couldn't go back and look at old Rockford Files at will then, of course, and you had to figure out how to do it. So I read a bunch of scripts and then I worked out 2 stories, which were, I thought, really good, and worked all the way out. And I went in and pitched them. And the first one, the producer said, yeah, that is a good story. We did it last year. And my second one was, oh, that's a good one too. And we are doing it this year. And so I had a thought that I hadn't done anything with, and I gave him the thought. He said, oh, I like that. I don't know that. Go home and write it. And that was it. I went home and wrote it, and they filmed it. And I thought, oh, is this going to be this easy? And of course, it wasn't after that. But I was very lucky. I worked my ass off on that script, trying to get it right and trying to get it in the rhythms and sounds that they had already created with Jim Garner as Rockford and his satellite people, and it worked.
And what else did you work on in Hollywood? How connected did you stay to that when you were there?
I was there. That's what I did when I was there. I was always freelance. They offered me a job, and I probably foolishly turned it down. But I got lucky. I met a guy who was in the same sort of boat that I was, and we wrote a script that was supposed to be sort of like North by Northwest, a serious thriller with some comic overtones. And it ended up being Hanky Panky with Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner. But we sold that. We sold that script. We wrote it on spec. We sold the script. And that suddenly allowed us to be thought of as people who could be trusted to write a story. So in those days, you could make a perfectly good living not making movies, but writing things for people who needed something written for development or needed a rewrite and stuff like that. And we got lucky, and Hanky Panky eventually got made, and that gave us another cachet. And for a while, they thought, oh my God, these guys know what they're doing. It wasn't quite true, but we sort of faked it for a while.
You are so Hollywood. You are so wonderful. And one of the reasons we love you so much is that you, in that last paragraph or two, said that you were lucky 3 times, and you're clearly not just lucky, which is always good, and we love luck, but you're also, incredibly talented, because all of that stuff, all of that background, all of that attitude, and the dialogue and the conversation and what's important is so throughout LA Burning. It feels very authentic about.
That's very nice to hear. I mean, as a writer, you're always carrying around a little load of self-disparagement. And in truth, in Los Angeles, a lot of it is luck. It's going to be timing, but it can just be luck. My friend Henry and I had lunch with a producer one day. We were talking. She wanted to do something in television, and it was just at a time when there were a bunch of new television networks coming up, UPN and Warner Brothers. There were a bunch of them suddenly starting out. Many of them failed. And we went and had lunch, and we just had lunch, and we were walking out. We were standing in LA. You do not park your car and walk someplace. You give it to the valet. So we were standing waiting for the valets to deliver our cars to us. 3 people, 3 cars. And Henry said to the producer, "What about a story about 2 surfers who are really DEA agents?" And she said, "Ooh, I like that." And we kind of worked up a story for a pitch meeting with the head of programming for the Paramount Network, which is not the Paramount Network which is now, but it was something that lasted for 2 or 3 years. And we went in to see him, and he was a grizzled veteran of the TV wars. And we started to tell our story about 2 surfers who are undercover DEA agents. And he stopped us and he said, "Is there going to be a lot of flesh in this? Bikinis and stuff? Is there going to be a lot of flesh?" And we said, "Oh yeah, a lot of flesh." And he said, "Go home and write it." Now that's just luck. He was desperate for something. We wrote it. We actually shot it, and it disappeared.
But I mean, you thought of it, you pitched it, they pitched it on Waiting for Your Cars in LA. That is such an LA story, because LA Burning is about that kind of thing. Karen Bonner, Cody Bonner's mother, is a 4-time Academy Award winning, I think, actress. And talk a little bit about that life as well, and her relationship with Cody, because the mother-daughter relationships in this book are so powerful and so pivotal and so important.
Well, I mean, as I said, Cody was the stone in her mother's shoe. She was always the one who was, the recalcitrant, the rebel. And Julie was the perfect child. And when Cody first walks into the house, when she's gotten out of prison, her mother hasn't expected her because she's not due for another day. She was supposed to be taking a bus from the Midwestern city where she had been incarcerated. But she got a plane through some interesting circumstances. But anyway, she walks in, her mother's coming downstairs on the way to the studio. And her mother looks at her and says, "Julie?" Well, Julie's been dead for a year. So that's the beginning of an understanding of the relationship between Cody and her mother. She's recognized as the dead woman, not the alive woman.
And that is such a poignant scene in this. This is such a poignant scene in this book, because you understand completely what the mother is thinking, and how destructive that is to Cody, and how that must have been how she grew up for her entire life. But the story, the detective story, the amateur sort of detective story of Cody Bonner trying to figure out what happened to her sister, is sort of the heart of this in the Hollywood milieu. And it develops, and I know we won't give anything away, but this is a story about the power of powerful men, and how far people will go to get what they want, and what can happen if you try to stop them. What was that like, right? And where did that come from?
Well, the movie business is sort of a pyramid of power, and I talk about people deferring to other people. You make an appointment to see somebody. If you're powerful enough, that person comes to you. If he's more powerful, you go to that person. And as I say, everybody's a little bit scared, because if you're not in with the powerful people, you're not going to get a hearing about the project that you want to make. And Cody's mother is you know, a woman approaching 50, so she's beginning to get past her sell date in Hollywood. Hollywood appreciates the young as long as they're women. Men can go on into their 60s and still be chasing in movies 35-year-old women. But she understands there's a moment with her agent, who's a very important person in Hollywood, where she turns down a script because she's not going to play that older woman, even though the woman is her age. She feels she can still play younger. That's very important to her. That agent is, at the moment, the most powerful agent in Hollywood. And he's an abuser. We know that he is an abuser. And Cody fixates on him for very good reasons, thinking that her sister and this man may have crossed paths at some point. One of the things that's interesting to me in writing it is the danger of certainties. When we become absolutely certain of something, even though the evidence seems to confirm our certainty, it's a very dangerous moment in your life when you set off to do something possibly illegal, possibly dangerous, based on that certainty. What if it's not true? And that's one of the things that I like to think about. I mean, we're living in a time right now where everybody has a certainty. You know, there is no elasticity in thought. It's mostly about certainties, which is kind of a mess. But within the power hierarchy, Harry Groban, who is her agent, is the top. I mean, there was an agent back in the day, back in the 80s, who, when a writer left his agency, threatened in public to have his soldiers shoot him down in the street. Now, that was hyperbole, but that was still a public threat from an agent to a writer. By the way, I was complaining once about a producer who had been treating me badly on a project that I was working on. And my lawyer, who was a wonderful woman, said to me, "David, don't you understand yet? Writers are the women of Hollywood."
Oh my God. And that seems to infuse this book a little bit now that I'm thinking about this. You know, that the underlings, how women are treated, what women have to do, what women need to do. And Cody comes out of prison a different person. I mean, she proves her mettle, you know, in chapter 2 or chapter 1 pretty darn quickly. So we know that she is absolutely a force to be reckoned with. And yet she has this broken heart because, as you say, she's been separated from her twin sister. And this book is, you know, prison is supposed to be about rehabilitation and punishment, but rehabilitation. But Cody is about redemption. Cody, the book of Cody, is about redemption. Talk about what a theme that is for this book and why that was important to you.
She's very self-aware. I mean, she understands that she screwed up her life and that she caused a lot of pain in doing so. And she's begun to think at the age of 26, after going through the crucible of being in prison, that maybe she, and the death of her sister, of course, is that maybe there's something redemptive about finding out who killed her sister. But maybe there's another way of finding somebody. Maybe she could give back in some way that isn't about the mystery about who did what to whom, but about people she meets who could use a hand up or a leg up. So she meets a young woman who is a street kid, for various reasons. And towards the end of the book, that girl comes back into her life in a way which is useful. So,
well, she says when she, even in that little snippet that I read, she says she's taking from prison only what she learned.
Yeah.
And that is her determination, and that is also her experience, which she wants to share. We're running out of time, but I do want to have 2 more questions, no, 3 maybe for you quickly. One is the big climactic finish, the sort of mano a mano climax at the end of the book is so cinematic and so gorgeous. I mean, I pictured it absolutely incredibly fast paced. I couldn't turn the pages fast enough. I'm not going to say what it is, of course, but it was brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Did you write that like crazy, or how was it to write that?
And I don't know. I mean, I think in scenes like that, I have a tendency to write something, and then it gets to be too fast, and I get up and walk away. I have to walk away from it and come back to it. I rewrote it a lot. I mean, I rewrote that a lot too. But I had a very clear idea of what was going to happen in the beginning of that. I didn't know quite how I was going to get out of it. I mean,
well, there are a couple moments where I thought, how is he going to do this? And then, woo, you just pulled something right out of your hat, and it was amazing. I mean, just so good in every way. I just, the whole, this is where the whole title comes together. Not only from the beginning, not only about burning passion and burning desire and burning determination and burning everything, just how volatile everything can be once someone lights a match to it, to desire or to passion or to need.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe the movie business has become mellow now. Maybe not as cutthroat. It used to be said in when we were living there that it was not enough that you succeed; somebody else had to fail at the same time. So it is a city that's kind of on fire all the time. I mean, it's a gold rush city. You can be living in your car, and a month or two later, you can be buying $1 million house. I mean, it happens all the time. Sylvester Stallone was one of the great. The story is anyway that he was sleeping in his car. He had no money. He had written a script. He got it to some producers. They said, "Great, we'll pay you $100,000." which at that time was a lot of money. And he said, "Not unless I get to act in it." And he just held out and held out and held out and held out. And they finally said, "Fine."
And I remember when I saw Rocky and when I saw that the font, the opening credits go across the screen, remember that in the yellow letters that said Rocky, and just thought, this is going to be something incredible. And the idea that it started, because these great, great Hollywood stories, so many of which must be in this book. It's hard to tell what's real and what is. And I know you sneaked some of them in. Quite amazing, quite amazing. And then after this big finish, this big cinematic finish, is this wonderful emotional coda for the book, which makes me wonder if there might be more Cody Bonner books. I mean,
I think there might be. I mean, I'm sort of fiddling around with it, but you don't want to go from a story that's so complete and just kind of shove things back into line and try and make something happen that's not happening. So I think there's stuff that could happen, and I'm kind of wondering about it. I'm trying to finish a book from the old series, and I kind of wish I could finish it so I could think about Cody Bonner and Los Angeles and stuff.
She's not out of your head, and we are really she's not out of your head. Let me quickly ask you, and I want to welcome Fred and Toby, people who are here, your pals and your fans are here cheering you on. Let me ask you, have you always wanted to be a writer?
Yes. Well, I don't know. I grew up in a writer's house. My father was a playwright and a sometime movie writer. So it seemed like a perfectly normal way to go about living. And as a child, and all the way up through, you can ask my roommates in college. As a child, I was a voracious reader, and in my teenage and 20s, I probably was reading 5 novels a week, 6 novels a week. So somehow I was laying ground for something I didn't really know I was going to do. But I wanted to start out writing short stories, and I moved to Spain. I had a very good friend who was living in Madrid at that point, and he was trying to write too. And if you're going to start out trying to do it, it's great to have somebody to bounce things off who takes it seriously the way you take it seriously. So I moved to Spain, moved to Madrid on $135 a month, taught myself to write short stories, and then came back and realized I was going to starve. And my father said to me, David, you have a good sense of structure and you can write a declarative sentence. Just go out to LA for a couple of years and make some money. 22 years later.
That's the old parking cars and pumping gas song, isn't it? That you can go. That's San Jose, I guess. But I see Alfred Hitchcock on your wall.
Yeah, like that.
Why is that?
Well, my father and my brother's father, Samuel Taylor, wrote 2 movies for Hitchcock. He wrote Vertigo and, less successfully, Topaz. So they were friends, and I knew him. And at some point that showed up. It says, to David, with best wishes, Alfred Hitchcock.
Do you think of the power of his directing and the power of his storytelling? And I mean, your book is so cinematic. It could be, I envision it as a movie. Do you think of that cinematic structure as you were writing L.A. Burning?
I don't think about Hitchcock. I mean, by the time I wrote things for the screen for 20 some years, and you write in the shorthand of the screen, but you have to be able to see the visual of what it will be if it goes to screen. And eventually it trains you to think in that way, which may be a bad thing for novels in some ways, because you tend to get wrapped up sometimes in the physical action and the surroundings, the setting the scene, But what it does do is, I think, Hemingway used to say that he thank God that he had been a newspaper man, because it taught him to write short declarative sentences and to push the narrative along. And that's what I think movie writing did to me.
But I think that one of the things that I said to myself about L.A. Burning, and one of the things that I think is the highest compliment of any book, if people say it about mine even, they say, oh, I could just see that. I could just see that. And that means you've started the movie in the reader's mind.
Yeah.
And your book does that so gorgeously. It tells just enough and lets us imagine the rest with Cody equals you attitude about Los Angeles and the people and the business.
I have a question here. Somebody has asked, an old friend has asked, can you say something about things that happen outside the narrative, things that have to have happened but not on camera? That, I'm a little confused by that. I sort of know what, I mean.
Well, but this is, one of the things that Beth is talking about, and I think this is an interesting and really wise question, is how much you as a writer are aware of how much you have to leave out and let the reader fill in with what they see and what they think. This sort of meanwhile back at the ranch, you don't have to tell everything. But
you have to have a very strong understanding of, like the 90% of the iceberg that's you never see.
Exactly.
So the top stays steady. I mean, you do things like, there are some young guys who are involved in movies, very important to the story. And they do things and have done things off camera where we only see the result. There is a cop who shows up and makes her life complicated. But we don't spend much time with him, but he has a strong effect on the story. I don't know if that's what Beth is looking for.
It's interesting because most of the story is from Cody Bonner's point of view. So we understand what she sees and what she thinks and what she hears and what, as you were saying earlier, what she decides and what she assumes and how she proceeds based on, and we are with her, but we only know what she knows. And that's one of the things that can make a novel so suspenseful, is that we believe her and she could be wrong. And that's what you do so successfully in this book. And I wonder if Beth says, I'm not Beth, I'm just wearing her computer.
That's
okay.
Yes, I know exactly who it is then. Okay. There is when I deal with the cop in the show, in the story. I do it in the third person. It kind of breaks that plane, so that we, the reader, know that stuff is going on that Cody doesn't know, because everything we get from Cody is only what she sees or what she hears. But we as readers understand that there's another force out there that's working to pull her down.
Yes, and that's the dramatic irony of the book, that the reader knows more than the main character does. Yeah. And that's another one of the many things that keeps us turning the pages of this novel. It's just great. When these books arrived, your big fan Lisa Gallagher is here saying, cheering you on, David. Love that Cody isn't far out of your head. So that's a very good sign. That is a very good sign. When these books arrived, when you opened the box,
yeah,
I mean, that can't get old. What was it like when?
No, that's wonderful to see them for the first time. And I had never seen. I mean, they didn't send me a hardcover, a month ago. I saw some paperback stuff, but I think it's just great. No, it's very exciting.
And when you see that, what do you think of the cover?
I like it. I mean, they gave me a cover that I thought wasn't right, and it seemed. It didn't seem to show anything about LA or what the title is. That looks much more like something I would envision.
Yes. I mean, Crooked Lane is a wonderful publisher, and I am so thrilled to see this book. And covers are always a process. The only thing that really matters is that you love the outcome. And this is just irresistible. David, congratulations on this wonderful.
You were wonderful. Thank you for this.
Well, I really enjoyed it, and I urge you all of you who are in the audience, to run right now to Mysterious Books and buy a copy of this book. I know Tom Wickersham will put a link in the chat, so you can do that right now. You do not want to miss this. And I will call Tom back on the screen to say goodnight to you all this evening, because David needs to get online and push this book a little bit harder so everyone know about it. It's LA Burning, the story of Cody Bonner, a story of redemption and love and Hollywood and possibly murder.
Some mayhem.
A little bit of mayhem, So we're so thrilled that you're here tonight, David. Thank you. And congratulations on your novel.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Hank.
Well, thank both of you, and thank you, Hank, for doing half of my job. Let's see, did it go through? Well, it looks a little odd. I don't know if you see it in the chat, you might not be able to click through, but if you visit mysteriousbookshop.com or come in person tomorrow after David will be visiting us to sign in person, we absolutely will have signed copies. And if you've pre-ordered, we've been holding all of your orders until we have signed ones to ship out. So thank you so much, Hank, for joining us. And
David, I want you to look at the chat, because Teresa is here and Diana is here, and everyone who didn't ask questions are now popping up and saying congratulations. So I don't want you to. Great talk, David.
Great talk. Nicely done.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not Beth. All kinds of feedback.
And read Hank Phillippi Ryan.
Oh, thank you.
Read that woman.
Thank you. That's so nice of you. I'm very, very excited about Her Perfect Life, which was just nominated for the Agatha for Best Novel of the Year. So
there you go.
I'm thrilled about that. Thank you.
One, hopefully.
It's right there in the back of Hank's.
Yep.
It was this way. I can never get used to the Zoom where it is, but
I can't point to it anyway.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. I don't know if there's any final statements, so it seems like this was a lovely ending. Again, really appreciate you both, and please visit the Mysterious Bookshop for David's books and Hank's books, and hope to see you all, next time, virtually or in person.
Great.
Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Everybody who joined in.